The biting December wind swept through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek, Arizona territory, as Grace Harmon clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her fingers, red and raw from the cold, trembled as she placed the small golden band on the counter of Whitaker's General Store, the wedding ring catching what little sunlight filtered through the grimy windows. "How much can you give me for this, Mr. Whitaker?" Grace asked, her voice barely audible over the creaking floorboards. The hunger gnawing at her stomach had finally overcome her pride. It was 1878, and the promise of a new life in the West had turned to ashes for Grace just as surely as her small homestead had when the drought took their crops and typhoid took her husband 11 months ago. She had fought to keep going, to honor Thomas's memory by making their dream work, but winter had come harsh and early, and her pantry stood empty. Samuel Whitaker, a balding man with spectacles that magnified his already bulging eyes, picked up the ring with practiced indifference. He turned it over, examining the simple gold band that Thomas had saved for 3 years to buy before they'd married. "Not much of a market for second-hand jewelry, Mrs. Harmon," he said, his tone suggesting he was doing her a favor by even considering the transaction. "Might get you enough flour and beans to last a week. Maybe some coffee if you're not particular about quality." Grace felt her heart sink. A week. What would she do after that? The homestead was mortgaged to the Territorial Bank, and without Thomas's strength to work the land, she'd fallen behind on payments. She'd sold nearly everything else of value: her mother's silver hairbrush, Thomas's pocket watch, even her good Sunday dress. "I'll take what I can get," she whispered, blinking back tears. The bell above the door jangled as a gust of cold air swept in, followed by the heavy footsteps of a man. Grace didn't turn, unwilling to let anyone see the shame burning in her cheeks as she sold the last piece of her marriage. "Mighty cold day to be out and about," a deep voice remarked from behind her. Whitaker's demeanor changed instantly, his face splitting into a wide, obsequious smile. "Mr. Blackwood, didn't expect to see you in town today. What can I do for you?" "Just picking up some supplies before heading back to the ranch," the man said, his spurs jingling as he approached the counter. "Got my men working on the north pasture fence, and we're running low on nails." Grace kept her eyes downcast, willing herself to become invisible. She knew of Adam Blackwood by reputation, owner of the Raven Creek Ranch, the largest spread within 50 miles. He'd come west after the war and built his cattle empire through hard work and, some said, harder dealings. As Whitaker fumbled beneath the counter for his ledger, Adam Blackwood's attention fell to the small golden ring still sitting between them. "That's a fine piece," he commented casually. Whitaker cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harmon here is looking to sell, times being what they are." Grace felt the heat of embarrassment creep up her neck. She risked a glance upward and found herself looking into the most penetrating blue eyes she'd ever seen. Adam Blackwood was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair swept back from a high forehead, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet intensity that seemed to fill the small store. "Mrs. Harmon," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. His gaze moved from her face to the ring and back again. "If you don't mind my saying, a wedding band belongs on a finger, not on a counter." Grace stiffened. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, what belongs where is my concern. And right now, food on my table is a more pressing need than gold on my finger." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, at her directness. "My apologies, madam. I meant no offense." Whitaker, sensing a potential transaction slipping away, quickly interjected, "I was just telling Mrs. Harmon I could offer her enough for a week's worth of provisions." Adam's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a leather wallet. "What would you say the fair market value is, Whitaker?" The storekeeper blinked rapidly. "Well, gold prices being what they are, double it," Adam said flatly. "And put together a month's worth of supplies. Good quality, mind you." Grace's head snapped up. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't accept charity." His expression remained impassive. "It's not charity, Mrs. Harmon. It's a fair price. Whitaker here was about to swindle you." The storekeeper sputtered indignantly, but a hard look from Adam silenced him. "Still," Grace insisted, "I can't accept Consider it a loan, then, Adam interrupted. I've got work needs doing at the ranch. My housekeeper left to get married last month, and the place is falling into disarray. You can repay me with your labor, if that suits your pride better. Grace hesitated. A month's worth of supplies would see her through the worst of winter. And honest work that would let her keep her wedding ring was more than she'd dared hope for when she'd walked into the store. When would you need me to start? She asked cautiously. Tomorrow. I'll send a wagon for you. He turned to Whitaker. Get those supplies ready to load. And I'll take that ring for safekeeping. Before Grace could protest, Adam had scooped up the wedding band and dropped it into his shirt pocket. I'll return this to you once you've worked off the debt, Mrs. Harmon. You have my word. With that, he turned and strode to the other end of the store, leaving Grace standing speechless by the counter. She didn't know whether to be grateful for his intervention or furious at his high-handedness. Either way, she'd be eating tonight, and tomorrow she'd have honest work. It was more than she'd had this morning. Little did she know that this encounter with Adam Blackwood would change the course of her life forever. True to his word, a wagon arrived at Grace's small homestead the next morning. The driver, an older man who introduced himself as Hank, helped her load her few belongings. The cabin looked even more desolate in the morning light, a failed dream that she was leaving behind, at least temporarily. Mr. Blackwood said to bring whatever you need, Hank said kindly, noting her hesitation as she looked back at the cabin. Place will be here when you want to come back. If there was anything to come back to, Grace thought, the bank would likely foreclose before spring. The journey to Raven Creek Ranch took most of the morning. As they crested the final hill, Grace caught her breath. The ranch spread out before them, a sprawling main house built of stone and timber, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. In the distance, cattle dotted the winter-brown pastures, and smoke rose from multiple chimneys. It's like a small town, she murmured. Hank chuckled. Mr. Blackwood's built himself quite an operation. Started with nothing but determination and a few head of cattle. Now he runs 5,000 head and employs 20 men year-round. The wagon pulled up to the main house, and Grace's apprehension grew. What had she gotten herself into? The house was far grander than she had imagined, 2 stories with a wide porch wrapping around the front. It was a far cry from her humble cabin. Adam Blackwood emerged from the house as Hank helped Grace down from the wagon. Up close, in the clear morning light, he seemed even more imposing than he had in the store. He wore no jacket despite the cold, just a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. Mrs. Harmon, he greeted her with a nod. I trust the journey wasn't too difficult? Not at all, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you for sending the wagon. Hank will show you to your quarters, Adam said, gesturing toward the house. You'll have the room off the kitchen. It's small but comfortable. Grace nodded, following Hank up the porch steps. As they entered the house, she was struck by the contrast between the impressive exterior and the state of the interior. The furnishings were good quality but showed signs of neglect. Dust-covered surfaces, curtains hung askew, and there was a general air of disorganization. As you can see, Adam said, coming in behind them, the place needs a woman's touch. Meals for the men are prepared by the cook in the bunkhouse, but the main house has suffered since Mrs. Winters left. Grace set down her bag, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. I'll start right away, Mr. Blackwood. You'll eat first, he corrected her. Hank, show Mrs. Harmon to the kitchen and make sure she has everything she needs. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Harmon? Your ring is in the top drawer of the desk in my study. Once you've worked off the debt, it's yours to take back. With that, he was gone, leaving Grace to wonder at the complexity of the man who had just become her employer. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Grace tackled the neglected house. She cleaned, scrubbed, organized, and polished from dawn until dusk, determined to prove her worth. The ranch hands, initially curious about the new woman in the main house, soon grew accustomed to her presence. They tipped their hats respectfully when they saw her hanging laundry or beating rugs on the porch. Adam Blackwood remained something of a mystery. He rose before dawn and often returned after dark, spending his days managing the vast operation of the ranch. Their interactions were limited to brief exchanges at breakfast or when he returned for the evening meal, which Grace now prepared and left warming on the stove. On her 5th night at the ranch, Grace was startled when Adam entered the kitchen as she was washing the dinner dishes. "Mrs. Harmon," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "I wanted to thank you for your work these past few days. The house hasn't looked this good in years." Grace wiped her hands on her apron. "You're welcome, Mr. Blackwood. I'm glad to be of service." He nodded, still lingering in the doorway as if wanting to say more. In the lamplight, Grace noticed for the first time that his eyes weren't simply blue, they were the deep, intense blue of a summer sky just before dusk. There was a sadness in them that she hadn't seen before. "Is there something else, Mr. Blackwood?" she prompted when the silence stretched uncomfortably. He seemed to come to a decision. "Tomorrow is Sunday. I usually ride into town for services. Would you care to join me? It might be nice for you to. That is, you might enjoy the change of scenery." The invitation surprised her. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Blackwood. I would like that." "Good." He nodded once, sharply, as if concluding a business transaction. "We'll leave at 9. The next morning, Grace dressed in her best remaining dress, a navy blue wool that had seen better days, but was still presentable. She'd spent the previous evening mending a loose seam and brushing away the dust from storage. Adam was waiting by the buggy when she emerged from the house. He wore a dark suit and had trimmed his beard, making him look less like a rancher and more like a respectable businessman. He helped her up into the seat with a gentle hand at her elbow. The ride into town was initially silent, but as the miles passed, Adam gradually began to talk. He pointed out landmarks on his property, spoke of his plans for spring calving, and even shared a humorous story about a stubborn bull that had led his men on a 3-day chase the previous summer. Grace found herself relaxing in his company. "You've built quite an empire here, Mr. Blackwood." A shadow crossed his face. "An empire for one isn't much of an empire at all, Mrs. Harmon." The simple statement, tinged with loneliness, struck a chord with Grace. She knew all too well the emptiness of achievements with no one to share them. The church in Redemption Creek was a simple wooden structure with a small steeple. As Adam helped Grace down from the buggy, she was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk gathering for the service. Adam Blackwood rarely brought a companion to church, and certainly never a woman. "Mrs. Harmon, what a surprise to see you." Mrs. Patterson, the blacksmith's wife, approached with a barely concealed look of speculation. "And in such distinguished company." Grace forced a smile. "Mr. Blackwood has kindly employed me as his housekeeper while I sort out my affairs." "How fortunate for you," Mrs. Patterson replied with a knowing look that made Grace's cheeks burn. "We were all so worried when we heard about your difficulties." Adam stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Grace and the other woman. "Mrs. Patterson, I believe the service is about to begin. Shall we go in?" Inside, Adam led Grace to a pew near the back. Throughout the service, she was conscious of his solid presence beside her and of the whispers and glances from the congregation. When the final hymn ended and they filed out into the churchyard, the pastor, Reverend Jenkins, made a point of greeting them. "Mr. Blackwood, always good to see you. And Mrs. Harmon, I've been praying for you since Thomas's passing. How are you faring?" "Better than I was, Reverend. Thank you," Grace replied honestly. "Mrs. Harmon is working at the ranch," Adam added. "She's brought some much-needed order to the chaos Mrs. Winters left behind." The Reverend nodded approvingly, though Grace didn't miss the curious look in his eyes. "Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Sometimes he places us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't recognize it at first." As they prepared to leave, Grace felt a tug on her sleeve. She turned to find Lily Madison, a young woman who had once been a student in the short-lived school where Grace had briefly taught before her marriage. "Mrs. Harmon, I've missed seeing you," Lily said with genuine warmth. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might still have any books you'd be willing to lend. I've read everything in town twice over." Grace's heart sank. "Oh, Lily, I'm sorry. I had to sell most of my books last summer." "Mrs. Madison," Adam interjected, "I have quite a library at the ranch that goes largely unused. Perhaps you could visit sometime and borrow what interests you." Lily's eyes widened. "Really, Mr. Blackwood? That would be wonderful." "Mrs. Harmon could help you select something appropriate," Adam continued. "Perhaps next Sunday after services?" The exchange was brief, but it revealed a side of Adam that Grace hadn't seen before, a generosity of spirit beneath the stern exterior. On the ride back to the ranch, She found herself studying his profile with new interest. "That was kind of you," she said finally, "offering your books to Lily." He shrugged. "Books should be read, not gathering dust. My father was a great believer in education. He built the library one book at a time, often going without so he could order volumes from back east. You don't speak of your family often. There's not much to tell. My parents died in a cholera outbreak when I was 19. I came west after the war, looking for a fresh start. Like Thomas and me," Grace said softly. "We thought the West held all our dreams." Adam glanced at her, his expression softening. "Your husband, he was a good man?" "The best," Grace replied, a lump forming in her throat. "Kind, hardworking, full of dreams. He believed we could build something here. A home, a family." She looked away, blinking back sudden tears. "We never got the chance for the family part." Adam was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Grace." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way he said it with genuine sympathy rather than pity broke through her carefully constructed walls. A sob escaped her, and to her horror, she found she couldn't stop the tears that followed. Without a word, Adam pulled the buggy to a stop. He hesitated for just a moment before awkwardly putting an arm around her shoulders. He offered no platitudes, no empty reassurances, just the solid comfort of his presence as she cried for all she had lost. When her tears finally subsided, he silently handed her his handkerchief. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the hardest part of surviving is figuring out why we're still here when they're gone." The simple statement, spoken with the weight of personal understanding, made Grace look at him with new eyes. "You've lost someone too." He nodded once, his jaw tightening. "My wife, Caroline. Yellow fever, 6 years ago." "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, unconsciously echoing his earlier words. Adam picked up the reins again, clicking to the horses. "We should get back before dark." The moment of intimacy had passed, but something had shifted between them. As they continued toward the ranch, a comfortable silence replaced the awkwardness that had characterized their previous interactions. The following weeks brought a gradual thawing in their relationship. Adam began to linger over breakfast, sharing news from the ranch or discussing articles from the newspapers that arrived sporadically from Tucson. Grace found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, when his stern demeanor relaxed into something approaching warmth. December gave way to January, and the work on the ranch continued despite the cold. Grace settled into a routine, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the house and creating a comfortable environment. She began to take pride in the small touches. She added fresh curtains sewn from fabric Adam had ordered without her asking, arrangements of dried winter grasses and berries to brighten the rooms, bread baked fresh each morning filling the house with its homey scent. One evening in late January, a fierce snowstorm descended on the valley. Grace had just finished washing the dinner dishes when the kitchen door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a half-frozen ranch hand. "Mr. Blackwood," the young man gasped. "Cattle broke through the ice on the north pond. Boss is trying to pull them out, but the temperature's dropping fast. Says to bring all the blankets you can spare." Grace didn't hesitate. "I'll gather blankets. You get back out there and help." Within minutes, she had stripped beds and linen closets, creating a pile of every blanket and quilt in the house. But as she looked out at the worsening storm, she realized the ranch hand had already gone, leaving her with no way to get the blankets to where they were needed. Making a swift decision, Grace bundled the blankets into a sheet, pulled on her coat and a pair of boots she found by the door, and set out toward the north pasture. The wind howled around her, nearly knocking her off her feet as she struggled through deepening snow. She'd gone perhaps half a mile when she heard hoofbeats approaching. A moment later, Adam appeared through the curtain of snow, his horse blowing clouds of steam into the frigid air. "Grace," he shouted over the wind. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" "Blankets," she called back, holding up her bundle. "For the cattle." He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion. "Damn foolish woman," he muttered, though there was no real anger in his voice. "You could freeze to death out here." Before she could respond, he'd lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her, one arm holding her securely against his chest while the other took the reins. The blanket bundle rested across her lap. "Hold tight," he instructed, his breath warm against her ear as he turned the horse back toward the pond. The scene at the North Pond was one of controlled chaos. Ranch hands moved through the darkness, illuminated by the flickering light of lanterns. 2 steers had already been pulled from the water and lay shivering on the bank, while men worked to rope a third that was struggling in the broken ice. Adam helped Grace down, taking the bundle of blankets from her. "Start covering those too," he directed, pointing to the rescued cattle. "I'll help with the last one." For the next hour, Grace worked alongside the men, covering wet animals with blankets, helping to rub circulation back into frozen limbs, and doing whatever was asked of her without complaint. The cold seemed to penetrate to her very bones, but she kept moving, aware that the animals' lives depended on their efforts. When the last steer had been pulled from the water and was being tended to, Adam appeared at her side. "Time to get you back to the house," he said firmly. "Your lips are turning blue." Grace was shivering too hard to argue. This time, when he lifted her onto his horse, he wrapped his own coat around her before mounting behind her. She leaned back against his chest, grateful for the warmth of his body as they rode through the still falling snow. At the house, Adam dismounted and lifted her down, practically carrying her up the porch steps. Inside, he set her on a chair by the kitchen stove and knelt to remove her boots. "Your feet are like ice," he said, concern evident in his voice. "We need to get you warm." Grace's teeth chattered as he helped her out of her wet coat. "The men," she managed. "The rest still out there." "The men know what they're doing," Adam assured her, stoking the fire in the stove. "They'll rotate back to the bunkhouse in shifts." He looked up at her, his expression grave. "That was a brave thing you did. Foolish, but brave." "I see couldn't just stay here," she stuttered. Adam disappeared for a moment, returning with a blanket which he wrapped around her shoulders. Then, to her surprise, he began to prepare tea, moving around the kitchen with unexpected competence. "You know your way around a kitchen," Grace observed as her shivering gradually subsided. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I wasn't born a rancher, Mrs. Harmon. There was a time when I had to fend for myself." He placed a steaming cup of tea in her hands, and she wrapped her fingers around it gratefully. "Thank you." Adam pulled a chair up opposite her. In the warm light of the kitchen, with snow falling gently outside the window, there was an unexpected intimacy to the moment. His dark hair was damp from the snow, curling slightly at the temples, and his eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. "Why did you come out in that storm?" he asked softly. Grace considered the question. "Because you needed help," she answered simply. "Because I couldn't sit safely by the fire knowing you and your men were out there struggling." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition. "Most women would have sent a prayer and gone to bed." "I'm not most women, Mr. Blackwood." "No," he agreed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You certainly are not." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Adam cleared his throat and stood. "You should get some rest. It's been a long night." "What about you?" Grace asked. "I need to check on the men, make sure everything's secure for the night." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Thank you, Grace. For tonight. For everything." After he left, Grace sat for a long time by the stove, cradling her tea and thinking about the man who had just walked out into the storm. The man who had once been a stranger, but who now occupied more and more of her thoughts. The man whose wedding ring still sat in the drawer of his desk, waiting for her to reclaim it. The storm passed, but its effects lingered. 2 of the steers died despite their efforts, but the rest survived a victory against the harsh winter. In the aftermath, a new camaraderie developed between Grace and the ranch hands who had seen her working alongside them in the worst conditions. February arrived with bitter cold but clear skies. One morning, as Grace was kneading bread dough in the kitchen, Adam entered with an envelope in his hand. "Letter from the bank," he said without preamble. Grace's hands stilled in the dough. "They're foreclosing, aren't they?" Adam nodded, his expression grave. "End of March, unless the mortgage is brought current." Grace wiped her hands on her apron, leaving smudges of flour. "I expected as much. I'm 3 payments behind now. How much would it take to catch up?" She named a sum that represented nearly all she had earned in her time at the ranch. "But even if I paid that, I'd just fall behind again. I can't work the land alone, and I can't afford to hire help." Adam leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "What will you do?" Find work in town, I suppose. Maybe the school will need a teacher again. She turned back to her bread dough, punching it with perhaps more force than necessary. It was Thomas's dream anyway, not mine. The homestead. What was your dream, Grace? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a very long time. Books, she said after a moment. Teaching. A home filled with children and learning. She smiled sadly. Simple things. Adam nodded thoughtfully. Not so simple, but worth fighting for. Some dreams die hard, Grace said softly. Others adapt. That evening, when Grace brought Adam his coffee in the study as had become their custom, she found him poring over maps and ledgers. Spring planning? She asked, setting the cup beside him. Something like that. He rolled up one of the maps. Grace, I've been thinking about your situation. She stiffened slightly. Mr. Blackwood, Adam, he interrupted. After all this time, I think you can call me Adam. Adam, she conceded. If you're about to offer charity, I must decline. He shook his head. Not charity. A proposition. He gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his desk. The ranch is doing well. Better than well, in fact. I've been considering expanding operations for some time, and your land, with its water access, would be valuable. Grace's heart sank. He wanted to buy her out. Of course he did. It made perfect business sense. I see. No, I don't think you do, Adam continued. I'm not proposing to buy your land outright. I'm proposing a partnership. Grace blinked in surprise. A partnership? You keep title to the land, but we work it together. My men, my cattle, your water rights. We split the profits 60-40 in my favor to reflect the difference in investment. You'd have income to pay the mortgage and eventually make improvements. It was a generous offer, far more generous than she had any right to expect. Why would you do this? It's hardly the most profitable arrangement for you. Adam's eyes held her steadily. Because I respect what you and your husband were trying to build. Because good neighbors make good business sense. And because... He hesitated. Because I've come to care what happens to you, Grace. The simple admission hung in the air between them. Grace felt a flush creep up her neck, but she didn't look away. Thank you, she said finally. I'll consider your offer. Later that night, Grace lay awake, thinking about Adam's proposition. It was a practical solution to her problems, but something about it left her unsettled. Was it truly a business arrangement, or was there something more behind his offer? And why did the thought of continuing to see him daily fill her with such confused emotions? In the weeks that followed, Grace found herself watching Adam with new awareness. The way his face relaxed into rare smiles when he didn't think anyone was looking. The gentleness in his hands when he treated an injured foal in the barn. The respect his men showed him not out of fear, but out of genuine admiration. She began to recognize the loneliness in him that mirrored her own. Two people who had lost their other halves, trying to find meaning in the aftermath. It both drew her to him and frightened her. Thomas had been gone less than a year. Was it disloyal to feel this stirring of interest in another man? One evening in early March, Grace was in the library organizing books that had been haphazardly returned to shelves after Lily Madison's visit, when Adam found her. You've transformed this room, he commented, looking around at the newly organized shelves. Caroline would have approved. Grace turned, a book still in her hand. Your wife enjoyed reading? Voraciously. A fond smile touched his lips. She was forever ordering books from back east. Said a mind needed feeding as much as a body. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. Adam moved further into the room, running his fingers along the spines of books on a nearby shelf. We met in St. Louis after the war. I was damaged in spirit if not in body, and she saw past that. Believed I could build something worthwhile. Grace set down the book she was holding. And you did. We did, he corrected. She was the heart of this place for the 5 years we had together. He turned to face Grace fully. Until you came, I'd forgotten what it was like to have a woman's presence here. The life she brought to these rooms. The admission hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Tell me about her, Grace said softly, sinking into one of the leather chairs. What was she like? Adam hesitated, then took the chair opposite her. For the next hour, he spoke of Caroline, her laugh, her determination, her dreams for the ranch. And as he spoke, Grace saw a weight lifting from him, as if sharing these memories was a release rather than a burden. She made me promise not to become bitter, he said finally. Her last words to me were, "Love again, Adam." The heart has room for more than one great love. He looked down at his hands. I didn't believe her then. Couldn't imagine ever feeling that way about anyone else. Grace's breath caught. And now, his eyes met hers, blue and intense in the lamplight. Now I think she might have been right. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and fear. Grace was the first to look away. It's getting late. I should finish here. Adam stood, respecting her need for distance. Of course. Good night, Grace. Good night, Adam. After he left, Grace pressed her hands to her heated cheeks. Something was happening between them, something she wasn't sure she was ready for, but that felt as inevitable as the coming of spring. The following Sunday, Adam surprised Grace by suggesting they take a picnic lunch after church services instead of returning directly to the ranch. The March day was unseasonably warm, with hints of the spring to come. He drove the buggy to a spot overlooking a small valley on his property, where a creek wound through stands of cottonwood trees, just beginning to show the first pale green of new leaves. "It's beautiful," Grace said as she helped spread the blanket over the new grass. "This was Caroline's favorite spot on the ranch," Adam said, unpacking the lunch basket Grace had prepared. "She used to say you could see the whole cycle of life from this hill: birth in the spring calves, growth in the summer grass, harvest in the fall colors, rest in the winter snow." Grace glanced at him. "Is it painful for you to come here?" Adam considered the question. It was for a long time. Now it feels right somehow, to remember the joy rather than just the loss. They ate in companionable silence, watching the play of light and shadow across the valley as clouds drifted overhead. When they had finished, Adam leaned back on his elbows, looking more relaxed than Grace had ever seen him. "Have you thought more about my proposition regarding your land?" Grace nodded. "I have. It's a generous offer, and the practical part of me knows I should accept immediately. But," she sighed, "but the homestead was Thomas's dream. Selling it, or even sharing it, feels like letting go of him somehow." Adam sat up, his expression serious. "Grace, keeping the land won't keep him with you, and losing it won't erase what you had." "I know that," she said softly. "Logically, I know that. The dead have their place," Adam continued gently. "But we can't live there with them. Trust me, I've tried." Grace looked out over the valley, considering his words. "If I accept your offer, what happens next?" "We draw up papers. My men start working your land as soon as the weather permits. You continue at the ranch as long as you wish, or return to your homestead if you prefer. And us?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Adam's eyes held hers. "That's a separate matter entirely. One I'd like to explore, if you're willing. But it's not conditional on our business arrangement." The honesty of his answer touched her. "I'm not sure I'm ready," she admitted. "I still feel connected to Thomas." "You always will be," Adam said. "Just as part of me will always belong to Caroline. But perhaps there's room for something new, alongside the old. In time." Grace nodded, grateful for his understanding. "In time," she agreed. As they packed up the remains of their picnic, Adam reached into his pocket. "I almost forgot. I have something for you." He held out his hand, and in his palm lay her wedding ring. The gold caught the sunlight, glinting warmly. "You've more than worked off the debt," he said. "This belongs to you." Grace looked at the ring, the symbol of her marriage and all she had lost. Then she looked at Adam, at the future he might represent. Slowly, she reached out and closed his fingers over the ring. "Keep it safe for me," she said. "Just a little longer." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about what had just transpired. Something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that were growing despite their mutual hesitation. The following week brought a flurry of activity to the ranch as preparations for spring roundup began in earnest. Grace found herself busier than ever, cooking for additional hands brought in for the season and helping with 100 small tasks that needed attention. Adam was often gone from dawn until dusk, returning exhausted but with a satisfaction that showed in the set of his shoulders. On the rare evenings when he wasn't too tired for conversation, they would sit in the library after dinner, talking about books, the ranch, their pasts, and occasionally, tentatively, their futures. One evening in late March, a writer arrived from town with news that the banker, Mr. Phillips, had suffered a heart attack. The bank would be closed for at least a week, possibly longer. What does this mean for the foreclosure? Grace asked Adam after the writer had gone. A reprieve, at least temporarily, Adam replied. We should ride into town tomorrow, see what arrangements can be made. The next day found them in the banker's office, speaking with his son, a young man named William who had recently joined his father in the business. I've reviewed your file, Mrs. Harmon, William said, adjusting his spectacles nervously. The situation is problematic. My father had already initiated foreclosure proceedings. Surely there's some flexibility, Adam interjected. Mrs. Harmon is prepared to bring the account current. William shuffled papers uncomfortably. The issue is that another party has already expressed interest in purchasing the property once foreclosure is complete. A commitment has been made. What party? Adam's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. William glanced toward the door, as if seeking escape. I'm not at liberty to say, Mr. Blackwood. Client confidentiality. It's Hollister, isn't it? Adam pressed. Richard Hollister from the Diamondback spread. The young banker's silence was confirmation enough. Grace felt her heart sink. Hollister's ranch bordered her property on the other side from Raven Creek. The water rights would be valuable to him, just as they would be to Adam. Mr. Phillips, Grace said quietly, my husband and I took out that loan in good faith. We suffered setbacks that no one could have foreseen. Surely there must be some way to resolve this situation that doesn't involve losing our land. William hesitated, then leaned forward. Between us, Mrs. Harmon, my father's agreement with Mr. Hollister was never formalized in writing. If you can pay the arrears in full by the end of next week, I believe I can convince him to honor the original terms of your mortgage. Thank you, Grace said, relief washing over her. I'll have the money for you by then. Outside the bank, Adam helped Grace into the buggy. Hollister, he muttered. I might have known he'd try to get his hands on your water rights. You don't like him? Grace asked, noting the tension in Adam's jaw. Let's just say we have a history. Hollister believes in taking what he wants, regardless of who stands in his way. Adam picked up the reins. But he won't get your land. I'll make sure of it. The promise in his voice warmed Grace more than the spring sunshine. As they drove through town, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her land and Adam's ranch operated in tandem, where perhaps, eventually, more than just their business interests might be joined. Their return to the ranch was met with unexpected news. Hank approached as soon as they pulled up to the house, his expression grave. Boss, we've got trouble. Riders came through the north pasture last night, cut fences in 3 places and scattered about 50 head. Adam's face darkened. Hollister's men? Can't prove it, but who else would it be? Jackson and some of the boys are out tracking the cattle now. Adam turned to Grace. I'm sorry, I need to handle this. Of course, she said. Go. For the next 2 days, Adam and most of the hands were gone, tracking down the scattered cattle and repairing cut fences. Grace kept the house running, preparing meals that could be taken out to the men and worrying more than she cared to admit. On the 3rd day, she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard riders approaching. Looking up, she saw Adam and several of his men returning, driving a small herd of cattle before them. Grace set down her basket and walked out to meet them. Adam dismounted wearily, his face streaked with dust and a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. You found them, she said, relief evident in her voice. Most of them, Adam confirmed. Still missing about a dozen head. And we found 2 dead shot, not slaughtered for meat. Who would do such a thing? Adam's expression hardened. Someone sending a message. We found this nailed to a fence post. He handed her a piece of paper with crude lettering. Stay away from Harmon land. Grace felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. Hollister, has to be. He knows I'm helping you keep the land he wants. Adam ran a hand through his dust-filled hair. This isn't your problem, Grace. I'll handle Hollister. It became my problem when they targeted your cattle because of me, Grace countered. We'll handle this together. A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. You're a stubborn woman, Grace Harmon. So I've been told. That evening, after Adam had bathed and changed, they sat in the kitchen while Grace served him a late supper. The house was quiet, the ranch hands having eaten earlier. I've been thinking, Adam said between bites of the stew Grace had kept warm for him. The safest course might be for me to buy your land outright. Hollister wouldn't dare move against me the way he would against you alone. Grace set down the coffee pot she was holding. Is that what you want? To buy my land? Adam met her gaze steadily. What I want is to protect you. And yes, to keep Hollister from gaining a foothold that could threaten Raven Creek. I see. Grace turned away, busying herself with wiping down the already clean stove. A practical solution. Grace. Adam's voice softened. Look at me. She turned reluctantly, finding him standing now, much closer than she'd expected. What I want, he said quietly, goes far beyond land or water rights. But I won't use this situation to pressure you into something you're not ready for. The honesty in his eyes made her breath catch. And if I were ready? Adam took a step closer. Are you? Grace thought of Thomas, of the love they had shared, and the dreams that had died with him. She thought of the months of grief and struggle. And she thought of the man standing before her now, who had helped her without demanding anything in return, who understood loss because he had lived it too. I think, she said slowly, that I'm ready to find out. Adam reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. Grace Harmon, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and certain against hers. Grace felt herself responding, her hands coming up to rest against his chest as she leaned into the kiss. It was both an ending and a beginning of farewell to the past, and a step into a future she hadn't dared imagine. When they finally parted, Adam rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for a very long time. Grace smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months. What took you so long, Mr. Blackwood? His answering laugh was all the response she needed. The next morning, Grace woke to the sound of raised voices from the yard. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs to find Adam confronting a group of riders, Hollister at their head. You're trespassing, Hollister, Adam was saying, his voice cold. Several of his own men flanked him, tension evident in their stance. Richard Hollister was a large man with a florid face and small, calculating eyes. Just being neighborly, Blackwood. Thought I'd pay a call on the widow Harmon. Heard she's been staying here. Under your protection. The way he emphasized the last words made their implication clear. Grace stepped onto the porch. I'm right here, Mr. Hollister. What business do you have with me? Hollister's eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance. Mrs. Harmon, I wanted to discuss the future of your property. The bank will be foreclosing soon, and I thought I might make you a fair offer before things get unpleasant. That won't be necessary, Grace replied evenly. My mortgage will be current by the end of the week. Hollister's face darkened. Is that so? With what money, may I ask? Unless Blackwood here is paying for more than just your housekeeping services. Adam moved so quickly that Grace barely saw it happen. One moment he was standing still, the next he had dragged Hollister from his horse and had him pinned against the corral fence. Apologize to the lady, Adam growled, his forearm pressed against Hollister's throat. Hollister's men reached for their guns, but Adam's hands had theirs drawn already. For a tense moment, it seemed the situation would erupt into violence. Adam, Grace called, her voice cutting through the tension. He's not worth it. Adam held Hollister for a moment longer, then released him with a disgusted shove. Get off my land, and stay away from Mrs. Harmon's property. She's under my protection now, and I don't give second warnings. Hollister straightened his jacket, his face mottled with rage and humiliation. This isn't over, Blackwood. Yes, it is, Adam replied flatly. Unless you want the territorial marshal investigating who's been cutting fences and shooting cattle. I have 3 witnesses who saw your men in the north pasture. Hollister's eyes darted to his men, then back to Adam. You can't prove anything. Are you willing to bet your ranch on that? The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment before Hollister broke the gaze. Come on, boys, he muttered, climbing back onto his horse. Plenty of other land in the territory. As they rode away, Adam turned to Grace. Are you all right? She nodded, though her heart was still racing from the confrontation. Will he cause more trouble? Not likely. Hollister's a bully, but he's not stupid. He knows I have enough influence with the territorial governor to make things difficult for him if he pushes this. Grace looked up at Adam, seeing him with new eyes after witnessing the fierce protectiveness he'd displayed. Thank you for defending my honor. A flush crept up his neck. No man speaks about you that way in my presence. Not ever. The simple declaration, spoken with such conviction, made Grace's heart swell. This man this strong, honorable man cared for her, was willing to stand between her and any threat. It was both humbling and empowering. That afternoon, Grace rode with Adam to her homestead. It was the first time she had returned since leaving in December, and she was surprised by the lack of emotion she felt. The cabin stood as she had left it, small, isolated, full of memories, but no longer feeling like home. Adam watched her as she walked through the rooms, running her fingers over the rough-hewn table Thomas had made, straightening the faded curtains she had sewn their first summer. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "That a house isn't a home without the right people in it," she replied. "Thomas and I were happy here, for a time. But now, she turned to face him. "Now I think home might be somewhere else. With someone else." Adam's eyes darkened with emotion. "Grace, are you saying—" "I'm saying I'm ready to move forward, Adam. To honor what was by embracing what could be." He crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "I never thought I'd find this again," he murmured against her hair. "This feeling, this certainty." Grace leaned back to look up at him. "Nor did I. But here we are. Here we are," he agreed, before lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The following week passed in a blur of activity and emotion. Grace paid the arrears on her mortgage, securing her ownership of the homestead. Adam's men began preparations for spring planting on the combined properties. And in the evenings, Adam and Grace continued to explore the deepening feelings between them. On a perfect April morning, with wildflowers dotting the hillsides and new leaves unfurling on the trees, Adam asked Grace to ride with him to the spot overlooking the valley where they had picnicked weeks before. The transformation of the landscape was remarkable. What had been brown and dormant was now vibrant with new life. The creek sparkled in the sunlight, and in the distance, new calves frolicked beside their mothers in the lush pasture. Adam helped Grace down from her horse, then took her hand and led her to the edge of the hill. "I wanted you to see this," he said. "The ranch coming back to life after the winter. It's healing, somehow." Grace squeezed his hand. "It's beautiful, Adam." He turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Grace, these past months with you have changed me. Brought me back to life in a way I didn't think was possible after Caroline died." He reached into his pocket and withdrew something that glinted in the sunlight. "You asked me to keep this safe for you." Grace's breath caught as she saw her wedding ring resting in his palm. "Adam, I'm not asking you to forget Thomas," he said quickly, "or the love you shared. I would never ask that." He took a deep breath. "But I am asking if you might find room in your heart for a new ring, a new promise." From his other pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person." Grace felt tears welling in her eyes. "Adam Blackwood, are you proposing to me?" A smile broke across his face, transforming his usually serious expression. "I suppose I am." Rather clumsily at that. He took her hand. "Grace Harmon, I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your stubborn pride, and your gentle heart. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Grace looked from the new ring to her old one, still resting in his other hand. Then she looked up at the man before her, the man who had helped her when she was at her lowest, who had respected her grief while offering her a path forward, who had shown her that the heart truly did have room for more than one great love. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Adam, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the pearl ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pressed her wedding ring from Thomas back into her hand, closing her fingers around it. "This will always be part of you, part of your story. I would never ask you to set it aside." Grace looked down at the gold band that had meant so much for so long. Then, with a sense of peace, she opened the locket she wore around her neck, the one containing a small portrait of Thomas, and placed the ring inside next to it. "There," she said, "close to my heart, where the past belongs. But my future." She held up her hand with the pearl ring. "My future is with you." Adam gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all that was to come. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the garden at Raven Creek Ranch. Reverend Jenkins officiated, and the entire community turned out to witness the union of two people who had found love after loss. Grace wore a gown of ivory silk that Adam had ordered from San Francisco, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Adam stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Grace as she walked toward him on Hank's arm. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Jenkins began, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have discovered that love is not diminished by sharing, but multiplied." As they exchanged vows, Grace thought of the day she had placed her wedding ring on Whitaker's counter, desperate and alone. How could she have known then that the tall, stern rancher who intervened would become the second great love of her life? That in losing everything, she would ultimately gain so much more? "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Jenkins declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Adam's kiss was tender and full of promise as their friends and neighbors applauded. And when he whispered, "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Grace knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. 1 year later, Grace stood on the porch of Raven Creek Ranch, watching as Adam rode in from the fields, their infant son cradled securely in one arm. Thomas Adam Blackwood had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, and he represented everything Grace had once thought lost forever: family, future, hope. As Adam dismounted and carried their son up the steps, his face alight with the joy of fatherhood, Grace touched the locket at her throat. Inside lay a small portrait and a gold wedding band, memories of a love that would always be part of her. But her hand now bore a different ring, symbol of a love that had brought her back to life when she thought all joy had ended. "How are my two favorite people?" Adam asked, pressing a kiss to her lips before transferring their sleeping son to her arms. "Missing you," Grace replied with a smile. "The house is too quiet when you're gone." Adam laughed. "With this little one's lungs? I doubt that." He wrapped an arm around her waist as they turned to enter their home. "I was thinking, Grace. The north pasture has that perfect spot by the creek. Good water, protected from the wind. Might make a fine place for a schoolhouse." Grace looked up at him in surprise. "A schoolhouse? The ranch is growing. More families settling nearby. Children need education." His eyes twinkled. "And I happen to be married to the finest teacher in the territory, Adam Blackwood," Grace said, leaning into his embrace. "Are you giving me back my dream?" "Just helping it adapt," he replied, echoing her words from months before. "Besides, young Thomas here will need schooling before we know it. And any brothers or sisters that might come along." Grace's heart swelled with love for this man who understood her so completely. "I think that's a wonderful idea." As they stood together on the threshold of their home, their son sleeping peacefully between them, Grace thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperation to hope, from loss to love, from selling her wedding ring for food to building a future she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Adam asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Grace smiled up at the man who had saved her in more ways than one. "I'm thinking that sometimes, when life seems darkest, the light finds a way to break through. And sometimes, that light comes in the form of a stubborn cowboy who believes a wedding ring belongs on a finger, not on a counter." Adam's answering smile was all the confirmation she needed that their story, born of loss and hardship, would continue to be written in joy and love for all the years to come.